Well, welcome everyone now to this faith leader panel. I'll introduce my co-host, Martha Dreyer. Martha, do you want to say a little bit about, just very briefly, about your work at Northwestern?
Hi everyone, I'm Martha Dreyer. I'm the Hispanic Community Liaison at Northwestern. Sorry about the feedback. One second.
Okay, I did.
Sorry, is this gonna work? Do you guys hear feedback?
Yeah, I'll say it. All right. First glitch, sorry about that. Yeah, Martha is the Hispanic liaison here at Northwestern College. And so we're gonna have to try to figure out how to not get that feedback when Martha is asking questions. So we'll make sure to work on that. But I would like to take a minute and introduce the faith panel. We have the Reverend Al Perez, who's the founder of Help Des Moines Commission for Latino Affairs. Welcome. Thank you for being here. We have James Roland, who is the pastor at Hope Evangelical Free Church in Storm Lake, Iowa. We have Brian Keepers, who is the lead pastor at Trinity Reformed Church in Orange City, Iowa, where he is the primary preacher and also provides leadership for the staff. And we have Father David Esquilano, who is the rector of the Cathedral of the Epiphany in Sioux City, Iowa. David is a native of Mexico and has served some other parishes and churches in the area. So welcome, and I'm wondering very briefly if Renato made it on the call. Let's see, I don't see Renato, but Renato Jimenez from Summit Church in Alta may be joining us at some point. So I'll begin with the questions, and we'll try to kind of move, kind of through and give people an opportunity to answer these different questions. And I'll begin with Reverend Perez. So I'm interested to hear from you how you believe faith informs your perspective on immigration and also the need for immigration reform, if you'd be willing to talk to that just a little bit. And it looks like he might not be here. So let's go to Father David. Could you speak to that question?
Once again, could you please repeat the question? I was
Yeah. How for you? How does faith inform your perspective on the issue of immigration and the need for immigration reform?
Well, the first thing is that as a Christian, I'm always called to love. So that's the first thing, and that's love to everybody, regardless of what immigration status they may have. Also, just from the Old Testament, in that case, following the Judeo-Christian tradition, there has always been this call to treat the alien, the foreigner, with respect. Again, this is regardless of any kind of documentation. So that's the first thing, is just trying to live even before my call as a minister, my call to be a Christian is a call to love. And that's the first thing that informs my decision or my decisions when it comes to treatment and advocacy for immigrants.
Okay, thank you. And I forgot to introduce Teresa Stecker. Teresa, I'm very sorry. Teresa serves as the executive director of I See Compassion in Iowa City, a nonprofit that offers immigration legal work for low-income immigrants. And for the past 3 years, you've served as the senior pastor of the Iowa City Church of the Nazarene. And so, Teresa, I would put the same question to you. How do you see faith informing your view of immigration and the need for immigration reform?
Yeah, I think I agree with Father. It's at the core. who we are as followers of Jesus. And certainly, you know, from the very beginning of Genesis, that we are all created in the image of God. And so as we are called to serve, and we are called to serve people as equal, we are called to serve people no matter who they are or where they've come from, and to treat them with dignity and to respond to the needs and to see them as part of our community, to see them as equal in our community, as we're all in this walk of faith because of grace. And so, you know, it is at the core of certainly my philosophy of life, but at that with immigration and immigration reform, when you look at that issue, whether that's family unity, whether that is treating people on the margins with dignity and respect and not oppressing them. I think that's just the call of all of Scripture for us as followers of Jesus.
Okay, thanks. And Brian, you know, we live in the same area, and so, you know, maybe to speak a little bit to that question, how does faith inform these issues? And knowing that we live in an area where kind of ideologically, we can fall into these ideological camps. How do we work at overcoming some of those things that divide?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jason. And I appreciate what's just been shared, and I would say the same thing for me in terms of what informs the way that I think about immigration. I think I would add to it, and this maybe gets at your question. As a pastor, I think one of my deep convictions is that the call of the church as the body of Christ is to demonstrate to the world a different way. And we're in the midst of engaging Paul's letter in Ephesians right now, which has just been it's just been wonderfully rich. And I've just been so struck by, you know, kind of this, the heart of the gospel for Paul in Ephesians is that all things are being brought together in Christ, in heaven and on earth, that everything broken and fractured in this world is being reconciled to God in Christ, and how the church becomes really a visible manifestation, or at least we're called to, here and now, of what this reconciling work looks like. And so every dividing wall of hostility comes down in the cross of Christ. And so I think that's one of the things that I continue to try to press into as a pastor of the congregation I'm serving in a more conservative community, is how are we as the church not just called to be an instrument of reconciliation, but how are we together demonstrating in our life together what it means to love one another, that all of the dividing walls of hostility come down, that in Christ we are the family of God, an international, interracial community, a new creation.
Yeah, great, thanks. James, maybe you could speak to the same question, how faith informs, how you believe faith should inform the immigration issue. And then Storm Lake is you know, an entirely different kind of community, a very diverse community, has worked very hard at, I think, trying to bring integration and diversity. But maybe that question too about how we move away from our ideological camps and try to come together. If you could speak to maybe the same question.
Well, I'd say amen to my fellow panelists here. I agree with what they've said already. Very much along what Brian mentioned, I think we need to remember that our citizenship is in heaven first, and to step back, because I think one of the problems is we've all been influenced by the voices coming from political agendas around us, which are just polarizing our nation, and Christians are getting caught up in this. But I appreciate how Bibles, Badges, and Business recognizes the contributions that these areas make. And so as Christians, I think we need to be very optimistic about what we are here for. And so all of your questions really go together, I think, quite well. They interact quite a bit. Yeah, in Storm Lake, we feel really blessed. We have some unique opportunities where we have seen an amazing amount of grace of God just pouring out. It's not a perfect community by any means, but we have seen people, both believers and non-believers, working relatively well alongside each other. And I think part of it does have to do with the scale. I think we're at a size of a community where we can actually know each other and we can work alongside one another and go to church with one another. And having those personal relationships really helps, I think, to mediate the political voices that might otherwise overpower us.
Great. Yeah, no, thanks. Renato, as an immigrant, how do you see the faith playing into the issue of immigration in this country and really the need for immigration reform?
Well, I think the way I see it is, I will just give an example. It's very easy. We always want to give what we don't have, and we always dreaming and we always think of how will be the world that we wanted to live in, and we neglect to live with what we have, and I think one of the things that I feel blessed is for the many diversity of people that we have here. And I also provide an opportunity, the gospel, Jesus clearly tell us to go and make disciples of all nations and teach them to obey. And I think within our church, just reaching out to people and their hearts and train them, disciple them. And I see immigrants, as myself, as the greatest missionaries that we ever gonna have, We have people from South Sudan in our church. So last year I had the opportunity to go to South Sudan and we started a ministry in South Sudan. We have people from myself in Mexico. We started a church in Mexico. And just a couple of weeks ago, we sent someone to Honduras, to establish some work. And we have a ministry in Chile. So I think we train the people, we disciple them right now. And as they go, wherever they go, you go in and you share the gospel wherever you go, And I think that's what we have now. So how are we using what we have now and help the people? We're here for the people, what are their needs and how can we provide those needs for them and advocate? I mean, there's opportunities to speak out for them, when they've been neglected or just coming to their defense. So yeah, that's how I see it.
Great. And I think Al is back on, and or he was, and now I think he's back off. So I'll turn it over to Martha, and we'll see if we can get this figured out where we don't give feedback to everybody.
Hey, can you hear me? Okay, great. I think I'll direct this question to, we'll start off with Teresa. As a faith leader, what are one or two primary issues that need to be addressed with regards to immigration and asylum in the US and maybe more broadly? And I think you guys have spoken into it a little bit, but just more in terms of, the asylum work that's being done and, what are your perspectives on that?
Yeah, I think this is such a critical issue, especially when you talk about asylum and families, specifically when you go to the refugee issue and you talk about families who have not made a choice to flee their country or their village because of safety. I just think as a faith community, we are to be a refuge. I mean, God is a refuge for us, and we are to be a refuge for those families. So, I think we've lost some of that along the way. I'm an Iowan, and I remember the 70s, and we were so proud of the fact that we were a refuge for many families from Asia. And so I think, historically, that has been a key part of us as a faith community, and we need to recapture that part of how can we come alongside people who've been greatly traumatized in their countries, who are seeking that safe place, a place of acceptance and a place of community, which that's the church.
Yeah, that's great. Any other thoughts on that, James? Can't hear him.
People coming into our country who want to stay here, it's almost like they're being metered out by a process that is expensive confusing and discouraging. And it's only the people who can endure through all of that, or who, are going to get legal status. And so I think one of the biggest issues is just a clarity of expectations. I think there needs to be a top-down change in the culture in our immigration system. Of course, the laws need to be changed, but even the culture within the organization as an institution, those things need to be changed. And I think Christian leaders need to step back from, as I mentioned earlier, just the polarizing political agendas and re-examine a biblical perspective. Because I think the only way that this is going to be fixed is by understanding God's character and his kingdom. And I think as Christians, when we do that, I think we will find that we have values and principles that will overlap with perhaps different political parties. But I think the way that we go about this and the solutions that we find to these problems, ultimately, they just need to be done in a gracious and godly way. And so I'm excited about what we as believers have to contribute to this, and hammering it out in discussions like this. I think this is excellent. This is what we just need to have a lot more of.
I think one of the questions for me, and I'm going to address this to Reverend Perez, since welcome back. I'm glad to have you back. What do you think should be the role of faith communities in addressing issues of immigration and asylum and refugees?
Well, I think it's a critical part of our community. Being down here in Des Moines, we have such a wide, diverse group of nationalities, kind of a hub for the state in terms of people that are coming into Des Moines. The church, and as I've heard on here, being in and out, has always, in this issue, we've had some division, we've had some issues where it's really difficult for some to come together on common ground. My colleagues and I have worked together exclusively, and unfortunately during crisis, that's when everybody comes out of their cubbyhole to align together, because the need in community is so vast, and oftentimes our immigrant refugee populations are hid away. Particularly here, a big hats off to Henny Orr, who's been on this panel, has done a fabulous job with Embark, who's also crossed the silos to work together. What's critical for us as pastors here, and probably the most divided house in this state, because we're here in the capital, we're here in the political hub. Those ideologies have crept into the churches, and we've found ourselves polarized and not willing to come together. And it's been very, very difficult. But during the time of crisis, and an interesting time that we've been through in the last several months, we've been able to align, and we've been able to have equity. One of the things I would challenge my colleagues on is that oftentimes when there are pastoral alliances, they tend to be slanted in a particular denomination or particular political ideology. And oftentimes there are several people groups that are not brought in with an equitable leadership voice. And that is something that we have strived to work with very closely here in our city, is bringing together all the ethnos together and working together in our communities. Therefore, we're getting to know one another. And also we are able to work together, co-jointly together, and we're starting to tackle those issues. We're going to the Capitol, meeting with legislators. We are meeting with, right now, candidates, understanding that allowing those voices that oftentimes are reluctant to come to the table, or are either not invited to the table, if you will, and to have a platform to speak and to share their voice. So a lot of that starts at the local level. It's building the relational equity amongst the pastors here. And starting with there and working with one another, serving one another, which we have during the last several months.
Good. Yeah, thank you very much. Father David, if I could kind of bring the same question to you, what should be the role of the faith community in trying to address the issue of immigration and asylum? And part of it is, there are some who want to say, well, the church and politics should be separated out, and yet immigration is such a political issue. So what should be the role then of the faith community?
Well, first, I agree. The church and state should be separated in that sense. But at the same time, I want to just expand on what James was saying, because I agree wholeheartedly on what he was saying, is that we live in such a polarized world right now, especially because of politics. I can't wait for this election to be over so we can just get that aside. The first thing I think is that we need to remind people that treating people with respect goes above and goes before being involved with any political affiliation. And the thing is that I see as my role as pastor, as a leader in the faith, to teach my people how to love, to teach them just this is what being a Christian means. One of the things that I keep telling people whenever I have the opportunity to preach about this is that we have to be careful not to let our political affiliation inform how we treat others. It has to be the other way around. And that's where I see the role of us as faith leaders is we need to address, we could say, the basics of being a human, of being a Christian, so that people can inform them whatever they do in life, that can be informed by that. Most likely we have people that can make changes happen, either in business world or politics or wherever within our congregation. So if we can inform them what should be at the core of how they act, I think that would be a great step forward.
Yeah, good. No, thank you. And Brian, if I could come to you, again, especially in such an ideologically charged community like Northwest Iowa, well, first of all, what do you see as the role of the faith community in seeking change and immigration reform and so on? And how do we engage that issue when we have that question of the relationship between faith and politics?
Yeah, I mean, I would just affirm in terms of, I think one of the greatest challenges is how highly politicized everything seems right now. And I think working beyond the ideology, and I would say, I think that's one of, at least in my context here, where we've maybe seen the most fruit is when we can help people get out of just the abstract ideologies and into relationships. I think of, was it maybe Brian Stevens in his book, Just Mercy, talks about proximity, the importance of proximity. And we found that when we can find ways to build relationships with one another, when we can create spaces where we can eat together, that's something as simple as that, right? Of sharing a meal, of hearing stories from our, Latino brothers and sisters, and being able to, I think, kind of see the commonality of our humanity together. But when I see people begin to kind of get into the place of relationships, and this is not just about an issue, this is about people, names and faces and stories, I think that's where some really beautiful things begin to happen.
Yeah. Good. Thank you. And Renato, I'd come to you with that same question. As you think about the possibility of immigration reform, as you think about the needs of the people who are in your congregation, how can the Christian community be helpful, and how can we work as Christians towards change that can be helpful for the people in your congregation?
Like I said before, discipleship, teaching, informing people, it's very easy for us to contextualize everything. And a lot of times we don't have all the information. We can see an immigrant and we right away think of, okay, they may come from a small village or something. but it's so diverse. I mean, just talking about immigration is just so diverse. And that's why we need to ask questions. We need to know people. We need to know the context. And by knowing that, having the right information, it will be easier for us to contextualize that, inform people, and communicate a more accurate information to them. And I think it's just be informed, ask the right questions, and communicate that to people. That way they know and they're informed.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'll turn it over to Martha now.
Great. So as we think about all the things that you guys are saying, which is great, and we think about what this actually means when we think about practicality in real life, we still have to think about the piece that, there's a lot of individuals here who are undocumented and who are breaking the law because they may not have an opportunity to change their status. So how do we wrestle with and reconcile that idea of charity and mercy and advocacy and relationship building on one hand, and yet the need for the rule of law on the other hand? Where does that intertwine, and how do we wrestle through that? So James, I'll start with you.
Okay. Wow, that's probably the trickiest question here, but it's a great one. And I appreciate that you asked that question. I think we do have to be realistic about this. And so I don't know that a Christian response is going to fit exactly with what we would hear maybe coming from any particular political party. Who can be against law and order? I think everyone wants law and order. It may not be the top priority. I don't think it's the first thing that should come out of Christians' mouths, but there is something about that. I'm thinking about 1 Timothy 5 that says, if anyone does not take care of their own household, then they're worse than an unbeliever. So there is something there. We do need to care for the citizens of our nation, and that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. But at the same time, we need to be quick to remember that we come from a place of great privilege and grace. Materially, we are a wealthy nation, and we do have space. And so there's a responsibility that comes along with that we can prepare for the people of our own household and our own nation, and also have resource and energy to help others. And so for us, particularly as Christians, having received God's truth and grace and forgiveness of all people, of all Americans, I think we come from a position of great strength. And so from that strength, we are accountable then to show mercy and charity, and to receive God's gifts and to have law and order, and then to not show mercy and charity, well, then I think the judgment would be all the greater upon us. So we do need to keep these things in balance and be motivated by them.
Yeah, that's great. Father David, any thoughts on this tension that we're leaning into?
Oh yeah, absolutely. The first thing I think that we need to remember is that I agree with James again about law and order, but not all the laws are just always. And we can see that in our history of this nation itself, how many laws we have had in the past that now we go back and say that was never right. So that's the first thing we need to remember, is that laws are not always just, and laws that are unjust need to be changed. Yes, we want law and order, but we also need to have laws that are just. And the other thing that goes perhaps further is for us Christians, and I will also throw a scripture passage there. One of my favorites is Romans 13:10. Love is a fulfillment of law. That's how we're going to fulfill the law, by loving first. And that goes back again to what I said earlier, is we need to make sure that our laws are going towards that. Any law that goes against it, that it excludes, is a law that we have to challenge and try to change.
That's great, thanks. And Alfonso, just thinking about your previous work as a chaplain for the Des Moines Police Department, and in thinking about individuals who have to enforce laws and regulations, coming from that perspective, could you provide us some insight? Not sure if he's.
Oh, there he is.
Sure. You know, at this time, can you hear me? Okay. Well, especially during the civil unrest, it's particularly been a very difficult time. As you can imagine, pastors in our community, again, coming together and being peace brokers during that time. It was so surreal when we've had some of the protests that happened here. As you know, there's a whole anti-police climate, and the vitriol. I was out there. Part of that is being out there in the streets. You can't hide in a cubicle in your office when things like this happen, especially as a chaplain, being there on the front lines, in the middle of rocks being thrown, in the middle of things being said, and tensions. A lot of the last several weeks, or months rather, it took a lot of us getting together and having behind the scenes conversations with our law enforcement. Also realizing that we need to support them and their families as well. And that's critical in the middle of all of this, even though we may recognize and some may agree or disagree, it's contentious over whether or not there are systemic issues or systemic racism, which is a big, big debate. And yet realizing that somewhere does the church come into play in being the peace brokers as chaplains. I'm going to share something with you in terms of chaplaincy that I found out down here. And it was a matter of going back to the conversation of us being involved and engaged in community as ministers of the gospel. The chaplaincy has allowed me down here to work very, very closely. And down in Des Moines, as opposed to a lot of the places around the state and police departments, there's a very strong, heavy outreach division. And it has been for 20 years. A lot of the sowing into community has allowed much of the community to build trust and equity with our law enforcement, even though on the national scene, this has all trickled down locally. Some of that we've been able to yield the harvest of that. And what I mean is we've built some very strong partnerships across the silo with our school district. I have said going into this year, the public school system is the new town square. And what I mean by that is I found out as a minister being inside there, and I'm going to tie this into law enforcement, how all these silos work together in conjunction, not just over here. I have found that my working alongside in our schools, having access to undocumented refugees, unlike I would if I were in my church or if I was in any other part of community, it is there that we find those families in need because they trust the schools. And it's interesting to know that moreover, our undocumented will trust a school supporting them than they will go to a church, or a congregation for help. In that I had, and I'll share this story with you, but this is a model and a template. We had a young girl along with her father from Guatemala come into the school system, in the public school system. She did not speak any English. Her dad was arrested by ICE. He was detained in Polk County, and I was able to work across the silos with an organization, a crisis organization, that allowed my chaplaincy badge to allow me access into the jail to speak with this dad, because he was isolated from this little girl. She was all alone. There was one of our faculty had to take care of her, no family here, very intimidating, very traumatizing. However, what that experience allowed me to do as a chaplain going in was to get to get the power of attorney from the father if he got deported and she got left behind, that we would take care of her, that we would take care of all those things. And then when it was safe after COVID, to send her back to Guatemala, of which we're in the process of doing. But we have had this happen numerous times where parents from Iowa over the years, particularly in the Latino community, where they have been, their parents were taken or, you know, exported and their children were left here. Some had family members, some did not. The great thing in this whole story is that the church has stepped up. You're looking at 3 silos, the school system, police department, and the church. The church is taking care of the airfare and taking care of all the costs to get her back down there, including all her traveling documents and so forth. And we're working with the police department to gain access to the father, to have that power of attorney. And you're also working in conjunction with the school system. I don't think this can only be accomplished in one particular silo right now. I think you're going to have to cross over in many of those areas in order to see a story like that happen. Just my chaplaincy alone, I can stand out there and I can help broker peace. But when we're talking about immigration and using that power of that badge, is being able to go in as an advocate into these systems. As of yesterday, we presented Governor Reynolds with criminal justice reform recommendations. So we realize that there is parts and pieces of this from a law enforcement standpoint that we could have a voice at the table to help change some of that.
That's great. What a beautiful reflection on working together collaboratively. Jason.
You got to mute yourself. Sorry. So, yeah. So I want to kind of address this in 2 different ways, and so I want to start with you, Teresa. And you know, I think most of us would know that they say that, you know, 9:30, 10 o'clock Sunday morning is one of the most segregated hours, you know, of the day. How do we, you know, Brian, those of us who are American, you know, Anglo-American citizens or white, and are leading, you know, congregations that maybe are much more white, how do we begin to move those congregations to begin to address the needs of the immigrant community from a faith perspective? So Teresa, I'll start with you.
Yeah. That issue grieves my heart. I would say, I mean, I think, first of all, we as leaders have to be accountable. You know, do we have immigrants who are good friends? Do we have immigrants who are mentoring us? Do we have immigrants that we eat with? And I think that, and you know, this is how we are at where we're at, you know, in my setting, is I was mentoring a young woman from Kenya. And I knew nothing about immigration. And, you know, it just opened a whole new world to me. And so first of all, and to talk about this issue, I mean, I think even, you know, I know in my denomination, it's like less than 10% of pastors who even address this issue, let alone what's sitting in churches. And then I think, you know, for us, and I think this plays out for others, you look at what your church culture is, what you're sensitive to. And for us, it was, how can we be compassionate to our neighbors in our community? And, you know, the minute you open your door to give out gas vouchers or food, you're going to get immigrants. And now what do you do? And how do you respond to that? And the church has to wrestle with that. So as long as we have a closed door in our community, as long as we're not out in our community, we don't have to wrestle with it. But the minute we open up, which we're supposed to do, then we have to wrestle with it. And in my setting, we've had to wrestle with it because we did open up our doors. And the thing was, we knew we needed to do immigration legal work, because it didn't make sense if we were about helping people move out of poverty and have abundant life, that's a huge issue for keeping this group of people in poverty. And so we sit doing immigration. You know, I got more immigrants that walk through my door than I can handle. And now we have 4 or 5 congregations of different ethnics. We work together as leaders. I have a Hispanic woman from Guatemala who mentors me. I have a Chinese pastor who mentors me, you know, and I just think that exchange has to start with us as leaders, and then it flows to the congregation. And I mean, Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
no, I very much appreciate that. And Brian, I want to shift the conversation to you. And the reality is we know that immigration reform is a political issue. And, you know, it's always interesting for me as a white male, Protestant male, in Northwest Iowa, when I talk to immigrants and say, you know, should I really be the one out speaking on this issue? The response that I get is, well, yeah, because you have access to power. How do faith leaders help their congregations recognize that they have a role to play in bringing about immigration reform?
Yeah, and I think this is, I mean, part of my journey has been, I mean, just to kind of follow up with what Teresa was saying too, with a lot of the racial tensions that are happening and have been happening in the country, with my own whiteness, with my own privilege, there's been a lot of work that I've been doing personally, just of wondering about what are some of my own blind spots, how, you know, I can be responsible for myself and my leadership and my preaching and teaching and all of these things. And I do think that there's something about it begins with us as leaders and our willingness to really do some of this work and to listen. I feel like that's been a posture for me of really wanting to be in a place of listening. So I think, Jason, I think the challenge is that on the one hand, I want to avoid us in the white majority culture thinking, okay, you know, it can be patronizing, right? We're going to kind of come in and we're here to help you. And, you know, we want you to, often what I find, you know, in terms of increasing diversity in the congregation is that we want to look more diverse, but don't make us change anything, right? In terms of worship on Sunday or, you know, so long as you'll kind of come and fit in and do things like we do that, then we'd love to have you with us. And so I think of really recognizing the need to not be in that place. I mean, being aware of kind of the privilege we have and not being in that place where we're the ones who are doing the ministry too. You know, we're here to help you. Can we get in that posture of mutuality and reciprocity? Somebody mentioned earlier, even just friendship. I just wonder if just friendship is part of the work that we're called to, that this is like gospel work. You know, so here's just one of my favorite stories I'll give you of how I saw this happen recently, is that we became aware of a Latino family who needed help building a deck on their home. And so we had a group of a group of people in the church who went and wanted to help them do this, who had some skills in that. And of course they did it together, right? I mean, so it wasn't just that, you know, kind of this group was doing it for them. They did it together. Well, this family they were just so grateful for that they said, hey, could we come and could we do a meal for your Wednesday night church programs? We'd love to come and make tamales. And you know, we said, well, that's going to be like a couple hundred people with all of our children's ministry stuff. And they said, no, we'd love to do it. And so they did. And it was one of the best nights together, where here there was a sense of we got to share our gifts with them, and they got to share their gifts with us. And there was just this wonderful aspect of mutuality and friendship and blessing that was happening in that kind of exchange. So I think, you know, again, I find that the more that we can help people break beyond the ideologies, the more that we can help people kind of break beyond just the abstract, you know, what's your view on this issue, to get people into real relationships. I just think that's really where so much of the traction is.
Good. Yeah. And Father David, I want to change the conversation just a little bit. And I'm curious if you'd be willing to speak to the needs of people who are a part of your faith community. You know, like if you could speak to Brian's congregation and say, here are some of the issues and needs that are really important for the people who come to my church every Sunday, what would be some of those issues and needs?
Well, I think the first one is just a basic acceptance, because there is a lot of rejection sometimes of immigrants. And I think that would be the first one. Also, advocacy, because a lot of immigrants are here without documents, therefore they cannot vote. And people who have that power need to use it as well, and use it well. So I think that would be the second thing that I would say is just get involved, do something, help me where you can. And then, because all related as well, there is a lot of poverty in our Hispanic community, yet desire to help, as Brian was just mentioning, that experience with that family, saying, oh yeah, I mean, over 100 tamales, don't worry, we'll come up with that. I mean, that's never an issue. We'll figure it out. I mean, very generous people, even though they needed something that you were able to help them with in that case, that deck. I mean, they're not just looking for help, financial help, they're looking for work and involvement. I've seen that whenever the parish that I have now has always been an immigrant parish. I mean, from the time it was created back in a couple centuries ago, I mean, it has always been an immigrant parish, and therefore we struggle financially. But we have a lot of generous people that if we have a need for a meal, they can feed hundreds of people, no questions asked, even if our parish finances are not doing well. So again, just to summarize the three things I said. First, just acceptance. I mean, just welcome these people. That they want to be welcome. They want to be part of the community.
Yeah.
Advocate for them. I mean, that if you have the power to vote and do something, do it. And the third part is just, well, there are some financial needs that can be solved with work, basically.
Yeah, great. No, thanks. And Renato, I'd ask you the same question. If you could go and speak to, and maybe you do go to speak to James' congregation, because you're both kind of local, or Brian's, or Teresa's, or my church. What would you say about what the needs of your community are, and how we can work towards reform?
Well, I think one of the greatest needs that we all have as people, we need the gospel. And sometimes there's this thing that, oh, I don't know how to speak the language. You don't need to speak the language. Just the way you show, love, kindness, and just be available. I mean, there's many different ways, to communicate truth, the gospel to people. It will create a greatest impact. So I think that I will see that as a greatest need, and sometimes we neglect that. What a greater opportunity. We may know, many of us may not have the opportunity to go out to different country, but God is bringing people here, to share this gospel with them. And I know many people, especially here from Iowa, that they've never been, they've been to other states, and a few times to other states. And so now God is bringing people from many other places of the world here to you. I think that would be one of the greatest needs, just communicate the gospel to the people. And the other one is just get to know people. Get to know people. I'm a multicultural pastor here, and so we have different cultures, and yeah, we get together and we have meals. I mean, it's just provide the people to come, and we have many different meals, many different opportunities, and it's just a great fellowship. I mean, it's just a fellowship that you learn so much, just by people, and just the pride that people take, by sharing something they have, and they really appreciate that. So I think that those would be the two things I will say on that.
Good. Thank you. Well, we're running out of time, but what I want to do is just give each of you, and it's got to be very, very brief. So, just real quick, are there any issues or comments that you would like to make kind of as a final kind of thought that, listening to some of the others, what others have said, or questions or issues that you want to make sure kind of get brought up, just to give you one final go at it. So James, we'll start with you. If you just have a final kind of word.
Well, it's a privilege to be part of this. I love what each person has shared. Brian, Teresa, Brother David, Renato. I want to do more of this with you. So thank you so much. And you, Jason, for organizing it. We need to lead. We're leaders. We need to lead and to look to the boldness of Jesus, who touched lepers and sinners, and he dined with them. And so this is exciting, to reach out. I just appreciate what they've said about relationships and stories, and partnering together with our sister congregations and ethnic businesses. That's what I'm excited to have, the flesh and blood relationships with these people, and to host them and to be hosted by them. I think reciprocity is really important. So grateful for that, and we'll be part of it with all of you in the future.
Good. Thank you. Alfonso, if you could just give briefly a final insight.
Yeah, I just want to just highlight the power of the church when it comes together. Just a real brief synopsis. The Food Bank of Iowa during the time of COVID response and the derecho response, 78 churches here in Des Moines, evangelical, Asian, African-American, African, Anglo, city, suburb came together and put an emergency plan in play. We became distribution sites all over. Speaking to Teresa's point about being able, when you open a food pantry and you have immigrant families come, that's exactly what happened here. So much so now that the Food Bank of Iowa and Central Iowa has now given the church here in Des Moines the strategy, almost like a Joseph Grace, to run the entire city food distribution. That's just one testimony of the power of how churches with equity coming together, and we're aligned together, and being able to do great things. In the news down here, there was a Latino pastor that came out from our group and allowed our officers to broker a peace agreement with protesters and kneel. Many of you guys might have seen that. That's to the testament of also raising up chaplains that are Asian, African, African-American. It's really right now engaging our ministers of the gospel here. Next year, we'll be bringing Will Graham in for a massive citywide crusade, because this is built. These relationships and serving the city and loving the city extravagantly have built. And so I would just continue to encourage bringing ministers together in equity and giving each other time to lead, and also opportunity to serve our city well.
Thank you so much. Renato, if you just have a brief final word.
Well, one thing I would like to say, I don't know if, how your community will be, but if it's diverse and there's a lot of immigrants, I will encourage you to join the fight. I mean, there's a lot of things, and I'm telling you this, I've been in the front lines. There's been several times that I have been in the front lines and people yelling at me, people fighting with me because I'm speaking up for people, and I can give you many examples, just quickly. A few years ago here, the mayor in Alta, he wanted to stop a trailer park, mainly immigrants. So we spoke up and we won that fight, so we were able to let people continue living there. Another situation with a soccer program right now that we're facing that fight too, and it's just immigrants that love this sport, so we had issues where to find a place to play, and I mean, it's just join the fight. I mean, in your community, if there's immigrants, trust me, there's been a lot of neglect and a lot of abuse and people taking advantage of that. So be aware of what's going on and join and fight for immigrants.
Thank you so much. Teresa.
Thank you, Jason, for this, and I'll stand with James. It's been fun to have a preliminary discussion about this, but my life is richer because of immigrants. Our church is richer because of immigrants. Our community is richer because of immigrants. Iowa is richer because of immigrants. And I just think the church has an amazing place, maybe even at a fork road, amazing place to take a lead in what hopefully could be immigration reform and a more just system in this society. We need to grab it. We need to seize the opportunity and go for it.
Great, thank you. Brian, you go ahead.
Yeah, I'll follow up on that too. I think that this is an incredible opportunity for us to be bridge builders. I just believe deeply that that's the call of the church right now, is to be bridge builders. We need it desperately. And I think in a polarized culture, we're being forced to pick sides. Are you for or against? And I think that God's created us for complexity and nuance, and we can hold tension, and we can kind of move into the midst of it and really be a gospel presence.
Good, thank you. And Father David, you get the last word.
Well, thank you. And also thank you for the invitation. It's been a great honor to be here. And I would just wish most of our congregation would see us here together, because we can show them, leading by example, that even if we're divided theologically, we can come together for something like this, very important. Even if we're divided ethnically, we can come together because we're called to be one body. We're called to be together. So hopefully this won't be the last one, and our people will see that we can be together and that we need to be together. We want to be stronger.